People who've had to kill others in self-defense. How is it like? How's life now? And what kind of aftermath followed? I used to drive armored trucks in a big city. I'll keep it vague for legal reasons. One day these two guys started following the truck. They followed us all day. We called it in, but because they technically hadn't done anything wrong yet, the police couldn't do anything. So finally, I was forced to stop for fuel. That's when they hit us. My door had just opened, and I hadn't even gotten both feet on the ground when they opened up on us. I was standing sort of behind the fuel pump, on the opposite side of the shooters, and the first 4 or 5 rounds from their pistols hit the pump. So I draw, and immediately return fire, while the driver of my truck slams it into gear to start rolling. I grab on, and we boogie right the fuck out of there. I think the whole thing maybe lasted 10 seconds, maybe less time than that. I emptied my magazine at them, all 16 rounds, and only hit one shooter twice. Both guys lived to flee the scene, but I found out later that the one who was wounded later died of his injuries. And as far as I feel about it, fuck those guys. They were going to kill me for $400 worth of change going to a convenience store. I don't feel the least bit bad about it. My husband works armored car, and I worry every night he goes to work. Not too long ago, one of his best work friends had to shoot a guy. Guy attacked a 2-man crew with a machete. Throwaway for obvious reasons. When I was about 14, one summer my family went out to have just some time at my grandpa's cabin. He was too old to go out alone now, so we had a nice place to spend summers. Grandpa had bought me a shiny new wood-cutting axe to chop wood, and I really liked it, so I carried it with me wherever I went, which was a lot of places. There were other cabins in our street, but not too many. I went exploring with my Dane/Retrieve mix Pumba a lot. We were in a blueberry grove, nothing but trees and bushes for a long way. I'd seen people here picking the blueberries, so I didn't think much of the scrawny older men hunched in the blueberries. It turns out he was setting a bear trap. He was a poacher and there was a lot of black bears in the area. He saw me and charged me immediately. He had a machete and was screaming at the top of his lungs about me not supposed to have been here. I let go of Pumba and he attacked the man, got him down on the ground, but with the wrong arm. Pumba was trying to protect me, but the poacher was hurting him with the machete. I barely registered running to help him. I had my axe, and I swung it down as hard as I could at him. When he got on top of my dog, I ended up hitting the back of his neck. There wasn't any blood, but I felt something give under the hit. He just kind of fell over, but Pumba was hurt bad. I just remember there being so much blood, and I had to carry him back home sobbing to my grandpa. Pumba lived, thankfully, though he never was able to run again. They found the poacher dead. I found out later I had shattered a vertebra in his neck and pinched several nerves and he just stopped functioning. There wasn't a trial or a hearing or anything. The man had violence-based priors, and I got about a month in juvenile mental wellness holding. I was told he didn't have family, but I don't think about it anymore. My parents refused therapy and I learned to accept that what happened happened on my own. Pumba has since passed away of old age, but he was a brave dog who saw me through a lot before and after this had happened. Edit. People have been asking for pictures. Here's the 2 I found on handpicked too. Thanks for the gold. Twice on a throwaway. That's wonderful. Thank you. Throwaway, because people know my Reddit stuff, and I'm not interested in this really being a thing in my current circles. Some years ago, 3 men broke into our home in the middle of the night and started going through all our shit. One of them must have knocked something over, which woke me up to hear them talking downstairs. I yelled out that the police were on their way, wife was calling at the same time, and that I was armed. I don't know exactly what they wanted, but 2 of them came upstairs, moving towards the bedroom where we were holed up, and I wasn't taking any chances. It was dark in the hallway, but I knew that it wasn't anybody I knew, so I fired a bunch of times down the narrow hallway. They both probably died instantly, or bled out very quickly, I'm not sure. I was more or less deaf after the gunfire, so I don't know if there were any sounds. Turns out neither of the 2 were armed. There was no legal aftermath. We lived in a castle doctrine state at the time, so there was no charge on my part. They picked up the last guy close by with things from our house and a gun. He was charged with felony murder for the participation. He took some kind of deal that got him 30 plus, I think, which also meant that I didn't have to testify. I wasn't really interested in that part. I was offered some counseling, which I took up, but I didn't feel that I needed it, so I stopped going after a few sessions. I'm fine with it. I wish I hadn't been in the situation, but I don't regret what I did. I wouldn't kill a person for my TV, but I also won't risk the safety of my wife or myself. Life is the same as before. After firing, I remember feeling relief, and that my initial fear completely vanished. Sort of a "was that really it?" moment. I don't know. Honestly, the most surprising thing in the case was that my homie Arwana's insurance didn't want to cover the cost of the shot up hallway and bloody floor. The police sent someone to clean up the once liquid blood, but it had gone through the untreated floorboards and made a huge stain on the kitchen ceiling below. We had to replace the whole thing, which was a huge pain in the ass. The metallic smell was awful until it was all taken care of. Smelled a little bit like a butcher shop. Nearly 25 years ago I was living at my parents' old 2-story house in the middle of farmland in Florida. They had both moved to a bigger city and were still trying to sell the old farmhouse. I was 20 and too old to move with my parents to their new place, so they let me stay at the house by myself until they sold it. This allowed me to finish college and save the money I made at my PT job. It was about my 3rd month being there alone. The closest other house was my uncle's house, about 3 miles away. The closest town was a tiny town a little over 10 miles away. It was about 11:30 p.m. and I was reading in my bed, parents' old bed, upstairs, and I heard a loud banging on the door. I walked out of the room and looked over the balcony at the front door and saw someone staring up at me through one of the side stained glass panes. It was a man in his 30s. I've never felt such a surge of panic. I called my uncle and it rang and rang. I grabbed the .357 Magnum that my dad had left for me and told me a billion times to keep close to me at all times, and I called 911. Once the dispatch operator was on the phone with me, the guy was kicking at the door. One loud kick every 10 seconds. The 911 dispatcher told me someone would be there in less than 5 minutes and advised me to tell her which room I was in. I was terrified, and I could hear the door starting to crack. I put the phone down and cocked the .357 Magnum and stayed at the top of the stairs, small, winding staircase. He kept kicking, and as the door was about to give way, he looked through the stained glass window again, right at me. I pointed the gun at him, and he made this expression that I can only describe as excitement. He kicked and the door gave way and slammed open and broke the window pane. He ran up the stairs, and as he took the first 2 steps, I stood up and shot him right in the stomach. He yelled and fell back and hit the foyer floor and started moaning non-stop, writhing. I stood like a statue with a gun, pointed at him until the cops arrived. When the first officer entered the front door, I pointed the gun at him, and he screamed at me to drop it. For some reason I lowered the gun, but couldn't let go of it. He said that everything was going to be okay, but I had to let go of the gun. A few minutes later, an ambulance pulled up, and for some reason, it wasn't until I saw paramedics that I put the gun down and started crying. The man died en route to the ER that night. The officers told me he had a rap sheet a mile long. He also had a .45 gun in his glove compartment. They took me to the police station and my parents drove back that night and took me to their new home. The house sold a month later, and I never stayed there alone again. My uncle was gone for the night to visit his other farmlands in Okeechobee. I don't really ever think about this event anymore. It takes a specific inquiry for me to remember it. I now have a concealed carry .38 special that I always keep in my purse and I would never give that up. I was 17. My parents had gone out for the night, so I was home with my little sister, 5 at. A man broke into our house around 11 p.m. I heard the glass breaking when he busted one of our windows. My first thought was to protect my sister, so I made her hide in the closet in my room. I gave her my cell phone and told her to call 911. We were watching a movie at the time, so the TV was on, but most of the lights in the house were off. I could hear him moving around in the living room, on the other side of the house from my room. I was able to sneak into my parents' room and grab my dad's rifle. When I stepped back in the hallway he saw me. I shouted that the police were coming and that I was armed, so he better leave. It was obvious in my voice cracking that I was terrified. He laughed at me and then he charged. I shot him twice in the chest. I kept the gun on him as I walked over to his body to kick away any weapons he had. He was completely unarmed. I think he only had intended to rob our home, and had I hidden with my sister, he might not have ever known we were there. The police arrived a few minutes after he died. I just watched him the whole time, and I remember the movie was still playing in the background. I don't feel sorry for that man, and I don't regret what I did. AskReddit, the movie was brave. I still watch it, and I do not associate it with the events that took place. My sister passed out in the closet, and does not remember what happened. My ears stopped ringing constantly after a few days and there is no long-term damage. My dad's rifle was in a lockbox, which I know the combination to. I was not charged with anything. Also I'm a female. Had you hid, you would not have had the rifle. You made the right decision. When seconds count, the police are only minutes away. Not sure if it was accidental, but while in college in my first apartment, I came home from work at 3 AM. Some dude was in the hallway outside my door, and I had a bad feeling about it. I paused and went to get the mail, hoping he would leave. Nope. I come back, and he is waiting at my door. I asked him what was up, and he said he was looking for John. My name is not John, and I lived alone. I asked him to move, and let me in my door. He told me to fuck off and get John. I slid between him and the door, opened it and he pushed his way in. I pushed him out. He took a swing at me. I swung back hitting him in the eye, which caused him to fall back and hit his head. Out cold. Forever. Apparently John was the guy who lived in the apartment before me. The dead guy spent 5 years in jail because of John ratting him out for drugs. Dead guy came to get revenge. Ended up getting dead. I was bouncing in a bar in Florida when a fight broke out on the dance floor. I stepped in between the two guys to break things up. As I had one guy backing off, the other started pounding on me. I was able to get behind the guy and wrap my arms around him. He wiggled enough to where my arms got around his neck. He kept jerking, and I heard a snap and released. He was gone. Life since then has been a series of ups and downs. I have since left the bar club scene. That day will haunt me for the rest of my life. In high school I intervened when somebody attacked one of my friends with a knife. This guy and two friends cut through the campus for some reason and threatened several people with a knife. The school called the police, but my friends and I were totally unaware. We had planned on meeting in the student parking behind the stadium. When I got there I saw this guy swing a knife at my friends. He had driven them back against the stadium perimeter fence by the time I got there. I ran up and shoved him, and he turned and swung at me. The first swing wasn't even close. The second one got me. I stepped in to grab him to take him down. He stepped in swinging the knife at my head. I deflected the shot and got stabbed in the shoulder before I took him down. I kneed him in the gut, and when he doubled over, I picked him up and slammed him headfirst into the concrete. What I remember is the sound of his skull cracking. I can't describe it, and I will never forget it. He got me in the crease where my shoulder and back come together to form my left armpit. The surgeon said that if the knife had come a half inch lower, rather than sticking in my shoulder, it would have severed all the veins under my arm and I would have bled out in the parking lot. I couldn't feel anything in my arm for a long time afterwards. The cops saw the entire fight unfold. They got there just as I was about to stomp on his head and knock me away from him. The knife was stuck in my shoulder, and one of the cops pulled it out. My friends and I gave statements in the hospital to the responding officer and a detective. Nobody ever mentioned it to me again. I never asked what happened to him, and I don't really know. The detective called my dad that night and I've always assumed it was to tell him the guy died. It had to be bad day for my dad, coming within a half an inch of losing a child, and then learning that that child had taken a life. This was just a few years after his tour in Vietnam. It had to bring back some bad memories. It was 38 years ago last March. I lived in a good neighborhood, but two men tried to rape and murder my mother and niece. So I had to kill two people. I have posted this story before. If it sounds familiar, work the night shift, so I normally get home around 1:30 am, and most times my mother is asleep this time. However, I could see the living room lights were on and two big shadows were moving around in my house. This was extremely out of the ordinary, so I unclipped my Smith & Wesson SD9 from my holster and slowly peeked in through a window. There were two guys in their mid-40s in my living room throwing things around and rummaging trough drawers. One man had a handgun and I figured I could wait and call the police from outside the house and keep an eye on them to make sure they don't head for the bedrooms on the second floor. However, when I glanced to the couch I saw my mother huddled with my 12-year-old niece who must have been spending the night. I knew if I waited for the cops this could go south. Before they got there, I was able to signal my mother to cover my niece's eyes and ears. I waited till the two men were on the far side of the room. I turned the doorknob and burst into the house with my weapon, pointed at the man with the pistol. I told him in a surprisingly commanding voice to drop his weapon. Then it happened. It felt like slow motion. I saw his arms start to flick upward, and I fired 3 rounds into center mass. The second man reached behind his back, and I had no choice but to put 4 rounds into him. What I can tell you is it's not like the movies where a person dies instantly. In real life people gurgle, cry, asks for family members, ask you why you did it and so on. But I wouldn't change what I did ever. Thanks for watching. If you like the video, consider liking and subscribing. I will be able to deliver better quality videos with your support.